Today I have a middle grade book to talk about. I have just finished reading the Jumbies, which is like a middle grade sort of horror story. The author's note in the end said she wanted it to be kind of like a fairy tale style thing because she grew up with a lot of European fairy tales in books, but she lived on the island of Trinidad, so like the folk stories on Trinidad were about creatures called the Jumbies. She said that it's also based a little bit on a like fairy tale story from where she grew up called The Magic Orange Tree, but that it only has a few like key elements from that story, so it's not like she just rewrote the story like people kind of do with things like Cinderella and stuff. But it was really cool and really unique. I liked learning about this like folklore. It was very interesting. The Jumbies is just kind of like a general term for creatures that go bump in the night and do creepy, scary things. There were a few different types that were talked about specifically in this book. You have twins that are like creepy little men slash kind of look like children, and they'll use their voices to call children and turn them into twins, and you can tell that it's a twin because their feet are on backwards. They were probably the creepiest creature for me, like just that description of their feet being backwards really freaked me out. But they were in here. There's one called La Joblesse, which is like a pretty lady in a pretty dress and a pretty hat. But if you meet these ladies in the middle of the night, you should be watching their feet, because the La Joblesse has one cow hoof, instead of having two normal human feet. So that's how you tell them apart. There was one called the Sukayara, which is like a fireball that wears skin, and then it'll get rid of the skin or take on a person's skin and like steal their lifeblood. Those ones were pretty freaky too, but they played less in the story, so they didn't freak me out quite as much in that sense. The main villain of the story is also a Jumbie, but she said that Jumbie was more like her own creation than based on a specific Jumbie story or type. But yeah, it was really fun. So the general premise of this story is we've got our little girl Corinne, and she lives alone with her father. Her mother has died, left a legacy of like this beautiful orange tree in their backyard that they used to sell like at the market when her dad like does fishing off of the island and stuff. And then Corinne makes friends with a little girl named Drew and two boys, Malik and, what is his name? Malik, and the brother is, why can't I think of his name, and why can't I find it? And Boki. There we go. Malik and Boki are the boys that she meets, and they help her to kind of fight off the Jumbies, and that's a really, really basic kind of thing that's going on. The whole story is actually triggered by Malik and Boki because they are like taunting Corinne at the beginning of the story. She's got this necklace that she inherited from her mother, and they've tied it onto the leg of an agouti, which runs into the forest, and so she goes into the forest to get her necklace back, and she thinks she sees something in the woods, and then from there the story just kind of builds, and you get all these Jumbie creatures that come along, and it was a really fun story. It had a lot of adventure and excitement to it. I felt like it did some good sort of moral telling at the end too, the importance of like friendship and standing up for things, even if you might lose something in the process, that it's still worth standing up and being like, I have to stand up and fight for this thing that I believe in, kind of a thing. There was some beautiful messaging on like grief and stuff because she had lost her mother, and so some of the ways that they have to fight the Jumbies play into that very heavily, and it was really good. It's only like 230 pages, so it's a really fast read too if you're looking for something a little fun, a little different. If you like folklore from places beyond Europe, definitely a good read, and I definitely recommend it. I had a lot of fun with it. I hope I can read more by Tracy Baptiste too, and that she writes lots more Jumbie stories, because this was really fun, and I'd love to learn more about Jumbies and find more folklore type stories about them too, because now I'm hooked. And she said that she didn't even like reference all the kinds of Jumbies there are, so I would love to read about more types. But yeah, if you happen to have read this or any other like folklore stories that are beyond European folklore, I'd love to hear about them because this was a very fun dive into something beyond kind of traditional folklore that you hear a lot about in even just like fantasy and stuff these days still. So yeah, that was a lot of fun, and I'd love some recommendations of further books that I can get into. They don't even have to be middle grade. This one just happened to be middle grade, but I do read middle grade, so whether or not it is middle grade as well, I would be there for it. But yeah, I think that's all I've got for now. This is the Uma Harper signing out.